No, the trip was not essentially for oil. The trip was about the Middle East and about Israel and rationalization of positions. But it is a disappointment, and it says that there are problems.
Are you worried about
I think I'm walking backwards.
The president says no one F's with a Biden.
No one with Biden. Yeah, good.
But it appears OPEC Plus has done just that.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video. I'm going to be talking about OPEC Plus's 2 million barrels a day production cut that's going to be happening in November. I'm going to talk about why Saudis and Russia and the rest of the OPEC countries decided to do this. I'm going to be talking about the implications of doing this, what's going to happen to the global economy, what's going to happen to the dollar, and also what actions can the US take as well. And this video is going to not only talk about the economics, but the geopolitics part as well. And sometimes economics and geopolitics go together. So without wasting any more time, let's carry on with the show. So as you can see, the Washington Post says that Biden's foreign policy with the Saudi Arabians has failed badly. Biden's fist bump turned into a slap in the face. Then you got Janet Yellen saying the OPEC Plus decision to cut oil is unhelpful and unwise. Then you got Blinken coming in on it. Even Biden has been saying some strong words to Saudi. And the Congress wants US troops to be pulled out of Saudi Arabia as well. And then you have Trump trolling Biden and the White House as well with his comments. All in all, the US is very, very unhappy with Saudi Arabia, very unhappy. But you might say, why is US unhappy with Saudi Arabia? Why aren't they unhappy with OPEC Plus? Because it's not just Saudi Arabia in that group. There's, a lot of countries in there. And as some people like to say, it's a cartel of oil barons. But let's not get into that right now. I'll cover it later on in the show. But I just want to say one thing. The world is changing. A new war is starting, and this war is going to be about the oil price. The Saudis are beginning to think for themselves, and it's freaking the US out, absolutely freaking them out. So OPEC Plus has announced a production cut a few days ago of 2 million barrels off the market to keep the prices up. And why shouldn't they? I mean, end of the day, it's all about interest, and every country around the world has interest. Every country around the world wants to make a profit. Why should they help the US economy and destroy their own economy in the process? I want to take you back to 2020 when the world had obviously the massive COVID issues. The whole world had shut down, and the oil prices went down to like $20 a barrel, absolute bargain. However, as you know, the world had shut down by then. There was hardly any production going on. There was hardly any manufacturing going on because everything was under lockdown. And who do you think suffered the most? It was the oil-making companies that suffered the most, and it was the oil-making countries. Saudi Arabia suffered a lot. In fact, they were very close to getting rid of all of their reserves. They had a war going on in Yemen as well. And if Saudi Arabia had run out of money, they would have been in major, major trouble. Other countries that were in serious trouble were places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, UAE mainly, Iraq, Syria, you got Venezuela, even Russia. All these countries were making very small amounts of profit, and they suffered a lot because of it. The situation is now there is a huge inflation going on. There are huge economic issues around the world. There's huge supply chain issues around the world. So these countries, rightly so, are now looking after their own interests. They see this inflation, global inflation thing, then they see this caused by mainly the US. So they're asking themselves, why do they have to do the US a favor and help their economy while destroy their own? So what these OPEC plus countries are looking at is they're seeing a lot of hypocrisy and double standards coming out of the US. The reason there's so much inflation around the world is because the US has been doing limitless money printing, trillions and trillions of money printing throughout the last few years. And now this has caused huge economic issues throughout the world. It's caused inflation. It's caused supply chain issues. And these countries have had enough of it. And you see countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, how they're affected. Sri Lanka's more or less collapsed. You see countries like Turkey collapsing as well. And it's all down to the strength of the dollar. Uh, they've been money printing all of these years. They've been exporting out the inflation to the rest of the world, all because the US has the dollar reserve currency. As you know, the US is looking after its own interests. It doesn't care that there's inflation going on throughout the rest of the world. It doesn't care that the dollar is so strong and all the other currencies are very weak compared to the dollar. And it doesn't care that all of these countries now have to pay over the odds for oil and gas around the world. The US is only after its own interests. So a lot of people may or may not know this, probably most do. The US dollar is the world reserve currency, and it's only because it's pegged to oil. It's what you call the petrodollar. And it's because it's pegged to oil, this is why US dollar is so powerful around the world, because it was until 1975 when President Nixon at the time went to Saudi Arabia and made a deal with the Saudi Arabian. And they said, all right, back then it was a very small pack of OPEC countries. And they said, if you guys sell your oil in dollars, we will provide you with everything you need. We'll provide you with security, weapons, and we'll host US troops in your land. So the US promised the Saudis a lot of things. Saudis agreed to it at the time, and there was no problems for years and years. And back then in 1975. We're now in 2022, and it's obviously over 50 years now. So what's changed? So what's changed is now you have a new leader, Mohammed bin Salman. He's the current leader of Saudi Arabia, and he's got completely new ideas how to take Saudi Arabia forward, compared to the king, who was very instrumental in building relationships with the West. MBS has got bigger plans and wider plans, which I'm going to be explaining in a little bit. So the US has been very dependent on Saudi oil over the years, but as you know, times are changing. MBS does not like Biden at all. He does not like him at all. Biden came to Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago, and there was nobody of importance greeting Biden at the airport. There was no parade, there was no red carpet. Compare that to Trump when he came in. Trump was given a parade, red carpet treatment. Prince met Trump at the time at the airport, and he had a good relationship with him. And with Biden, there is absolutely no relationship whatsoever. And compare that to also Lavrov coming into Saudi Arabia as well. Even Lavrov was given the red carpet treatment. So the US is not really getting along with Saudi Arabia, and that's for many reasons, which I'm going to be explaining. So why do the Saudis hate Biden so much? Well, first of all, when Biden came to power, he immediately said that he's going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. He called for MBS to be put on trial. He said he's not going to be talking to MBS directly, he's going to go straight to his father. And also, Biden allowed a lot of lawsuits to be placed upon Prince MBS at the time as well. And these lawsuits are still going on. There was also a lack of support in the Yemen war as well. I believe a couple of incidents where the US had took off some Patriot missile systems, and these Patriot missile systems are anti-air systems. They took them off Saudi Arabia's territory, and because of that, the Houthis managed to attack their oil facilities with rockets and drones. So the Saudis are not very happy about that. They felt that the US is basically going back on their word. The fact that they promised them security and protection is basically has been a lie. So they've not been happy about that. The other reasons they're not happy about is US's refusal to add Houthis to the list of terrorist groups, and also the US is negotiating with Iran regarding the JCPOA as well. And Saudi Arabia and Iran are big major rivals. So Saudi Arabia is not very happy with the US regarding that. But I believe one of the main reasons MBS is looking away from the West, and this is something that's not covered in any article or any YouTube. So I'm going to give you a complete exclusive thoughts on this. And this is one of the main reasons why MBS is moving away from the West. And this is coming from a couple of friends of mine who actually are from Saudi Arabia. And they actually sat with me and explained everything and discussed everything in detail. So that's why I'm kind of sharing all of this knowledge with you guys. So MBS feels absolutely let down by the West and absolutely humiliated. So I don't know if you know that Saudi Arabia are going through a lot of changes at the moment. They're building something called the Line, and they're building a new city called Neom. And these new cities around Saudi Arabia are going to cost the kingdom over $1 trillion. And what Prince Salman wanted to do, he wanted to put half of the money from the oil wealth into these cities, but he also wanted around 500 billion in investments, and he wanted it from the West as well. And he feels absolutely betrayed because do you know how much investment has come in from the West into Neom or into the Line? Absolutely zero, zero, zilch, zero investment has come from the West. Mainly because of the Khashoggi murder, obviously, a lot of Western companies pulled out. But the fact of the matter is, when MBS needs the West's help, he feels that they abandon him. They don't want to help Saudi Arabia develop as a country. They don't want to help out in his infrastructure. They want Saudi Arabia to remain poor. And other countries have come in to help out, countries like China. And this is why Saudi Arabia is pivoting more towards China. So China has agreed to help Saudi Arabia. They've helped them build this high-speed rail link on the desert, and they're helping them build other infrastructure projects around Saudi Arabia as well. So they feel abandoned by the West, and this is why MBS is thinking of moving away from the West because he feels that the West have been using Saudi Arabia for all of these years, but whenever Saudi Arabia needed their help when it comes to raising money for a new city, things like that. However, I do feel that Saudi Arabia eventually will start selling oil in Chinese yuan to China and use different currencies for different countries. But they would want to have security in return. Because what's happening right now, the US is calling for US troops to be pulled out of Saudi Arabia. They're probably not going to provide much support to Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia will want that gap to be filled by other countries, whether it's Russia, China, or maybe kind of a bit of both. Who knows? So unless Saudi Arabia have got sorted out their security going forward, I don't think they will change their currency right now. However, what they can do is increase and decrease oil production like they have right now. So I've given you the reasons why Saudi Arabia has done this, and the reason OPEC has slashed 2 million barrels is because the US is increasing its interest rates further. It's also talking about having oil price caps as well around the world. So all of this stuff has spooked OPEC Plus, and they decided to cut it by 2 million barrels because all of these actions that the US is taking unilaterally, they felt that they need to do something in return. So cutting production causes two things. Number one, oil price will rise, which is good news for oil producing countries. And the second thing is less dollars are circulated around the world. And actually, there is another reason. Basically, you make more profit by selling less. So even though you're cutting production, what you'll find is your oil prices will shoot up. And what you'll find is you're probably making the same amount or even more, even though you're selling much less oil. So this is like a win-win to all of the oil-making countries. So let me take you back to 2020 when oil went down to like $20 and it was absolutely bargain basement prices back then. And back then, the USA did not help the Saudis. The Middle Eastern countries were going through a lot of heartache, especially places like Dubai, who actually rely on oil and rely on tourism as well. They had absolutely zero money and they had to be bailed out by Abu Dhabi, I believe. But one thing's for sure, fossil fuel still provides 80% of the world's energy needs. And we're talking about oil, gas, coal. And obviously, OPEC controls the price of oil. They can increase production, decrease production, and this will set the price of oil. But what a lot of people don't understand is there's other ways to set the price of oil as well. Another way is to destroy demand, and you can destroy the demand in a couple of ways. One is obviously lock down everything because of COVID, or secondly, you can hike your interest rates. And this is what the US has been doing unilaterally. They've been hiking the interest rates, and in return, this causes two effects. Number one, interest rates go up, so the cost of borrowing becomes very expensive. So a lot of companies don't borrow or they have very less earnings because the cost of paying back that interest is very, very high. So they make less money. Second thing it does, it devalues your currency compared to the dollar because the world reserve currency is the dollar. Your dollar will go down while the US dollar will go up. And this is why it's going to cost much, much more for rest of the world to buy oil, and this is going to affect the world's economy. So you can see how OPEC plus United States Federal Reserve are basically battling with each other. One is trying to increase the interest rates, and the other is trying to reduce the production. So it's become like a tug of war, and the Feds are obviously looking after the US interests and the US economy, while the OPEC plus countries are trying to look after their own interests to keep the oil prices high. So we're coming to a new world order right now. The time for cheap oil and cheap gas is over. You know, it's completely over. The Europeans have been living on cheap Russian gas for years now, and one of the main reasons German industry has been very competitive with the rest of the world is because of cheap Russian gas, and now they've destroyed that. And US has been loving cheap, oil as well over the years. As you know, the US has been making its own oil via fracking, and it's also become energy independent. It doesn't need to import oil from Saudi Arabia. It produces its own oil. It's got oil coming in from Canada as well. So the US has got very much a big control over the oil around the world. And what you might think is what's changed over the years? Why is suddenly all this stuff happening around the world with oil? Well, let me tell you what's changed. You know, back when US was the sole superpower of the world, we're talking about 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000. It was mainly the US and Europe which were the main industries, the main polluters, the main drivers of cars. And the rest of the world was pretty poor in comparison. Then you have the rise of China happening from, say, 1980. You got 1990, the year 2000, China is still rising. And then 2010 to 2020, or shall we say now 2022, China has become a very powerful country, and now it's it needs a lot of oil. It needs a lot of oil for its production. It basically exports a lot of goods around the world. So all these factories need oil, they need energy. And a lot of China's people who were, having a lot of poverty back in the day as well, a lot of them have come out of poverty. Now they're driving cars. So the demand for oil in China has gone up a lot, which means this has pushed up oil prices around the world. And the US doesn't have sole control over oil anymore. You have countries such as India up and coming, and you have the Asian countries as well, which they have a bigger demand for oil as well. So you see, there's a lot more demand now than the supply, which means these high oil gas prices are here to stay. It's not going to go down. It's actually going to carry on going up because there's more demand than supply right now, and the world is basically scrambling around to get as much as they can get. So why did OPEC Plus reduce it by 2 million barrels? Because that is a huge number. And because before they went into that meetings, I saw articles saying they might reduce it, but nobody expected it to be reduced by 2 million. Why the 2 million? This is what you could call a preemptive strike. So this is basically the action of the US of the last few weeks. The US has been talking about putting price caps on oil. They have been talking about increasing interest rates further. They are talking about doing a lot of stuff unilaterally, and obviously the OPEC countries didn't like it. So this action by them is basically telling the US, we're not happy with what you're doing. We have our own interests in mind, and this is our reaction to your actions over the past few weeks. Plus, you can see the dollar, how it's going out of control. It's getting stronger and stronger by the day. And OPEC Plus also feel like they need to do something about it as well, because there's way too demand for the dollar right now. There's a lot of countries going broke to buy oil. You're talking about Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey. You know, countries are just falling one by one because the dollar is too strong, and these countries do not have enough money to buy oil to keep their economies going. So this is why OPEC Plus did this action, because they feel that the US has got too much control over the world's economy and the inflation that's going on around the world. So OPEC Plus is trying to put a stop to it. And this is also two fingers up at the United States administration, saying that you cannot dictate terms, you cannot tell us what to do. We set the oil prices, you don't. So you cannot tell us what to do, and we have our own interests. So this is a big, massive two fingers at Biden, and obviously Biden is not very happy at all, neither is his administration. So going forward, I believe the US has run out of tools because raising interest rates is not going to work, because all that will do is OPEC will cut production further to circumvent any interest rate rises. So that's not going to work. So we have a new oil order happening around the world, leading countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia. And as you know, a lot of countries have refused to sanction Russia, same as the collective West has. And the fact that they want to put more sanctions on Russia, put price caps on Russia as well, it's just not going to work, because you just have to look at the global south. You know, Russia still has got a massive market in China, India, Asia, Africa, Middle East. You know, there's a lot of supporters for Russia. They refuse to sanction Russia because of it. And the West is losing its touch. And even recently, there was a UN vote. Um, the West tried to put on China regarding the Uyghurs, and even that vote failed. There was more countries voting against than for that motion. So again, the West is getting embarrassed. They're losing more and more of their friends and allies. And things are not looking good for the US as well. We see a huge new world order happening, a multipolar world, and it's not the world that the US can control anymore. So also you have to look at China as well. China has been buying cheap oil from Russia, from Iran, from Venezuela, and China is not going to be affected as much because China also is a huge oil producer itself. They produce a lot of oil for themselves. China also is the largest electric car manufacturer, and there are a lot of people driving electric cars in China right now. So they need less and less oil day by day because because of the huge renewable push as well. And so slowly China is less and less dependent on oil, but they still need oil. However, they do buy a lot of cheap Russian oil, a lot of cheap Iranian oil as well. And they obviously still buy it from Saudi Arabia. But however, these cheap options are not available to the West, like Europe, like the United States. So China has got a big advantage when it comes to that. The world is moving towards two oil blocks. You have the NATO bloc and you have the OPEC bloc. The NATO bloc is the oil producing countries like the US, Canada, Norway, and they provide oil mainly to the West. Norway provides to Europe, and Canada and US, obviously, they provide it for themselves. And then you have the OPEC Plus block as well, which mainly supplies to the rest of the world. And plus also supplies to the US as well, but mainly to the rest of the world. And we're talking about, Asia, Africa, other parts of Europe as well. And it's basically a balancing act. And the end result is still going to be the same. The fact that oil prices were still going to stay high, gas prices are still going to stay high, and it doesn't matter what the US does, whether it's with price caps, with interest rate rises, it cannot dictate the price of oil because OPEC will always find a way to reduce production and increase the price. So this is a major, major problem for the US because they feel that they cannot control Saudi Arabia anymore. So what can the US do about it? Well, Biden recently said that he's looking at all available options, and reality is he cannot really do anything. However, there are some things that the US can do. Number one, they can pump more oil, which means increase more fracking licenses around the US so they can print more, basically produce more oil to circumvent the production loss in OPEC. However, they will not be able to do 2 million barrels a day because that is a huge number. And even if all of these fracking licenses were granted and they start working on them. It's going to take time to set up the equipment, to start digging. These things you cannot start and run overnight. These things take time. We're talking about probably like a year or something. So this is not something they can do straight away. The other thing is they can do is they could sanction Saudi Arabia, but sanctioning Saudi Arabia is going to make things worse because what this would mean is Saudi will be forced to sell their oil in other currencies like the yuan, it's like in ruble, sell it to other countries in their local currencies. They're not going to sell it in dollars, and this is going to make things worse, and this is going to, accelerate the fall of the petrodollar or fall of the dollar. So I don't think US has got guts to do that to Saudi Arabia. The third thing, and it's probably quite a likely thing to be honest, third thing is they could invade Saudi Arabia. And you're thinking, hang on a second, the US is not going to invade Saudi Arabia. Well, there has been some papers leaked recently, and in 1973, the US was ready to kind of invade Saudi Arabia. This was due to the oil crisis at the time. There was wars going on with Israel, and Saudi Arabia and other oil-making countries decided to put an oil embargo against the West. And this didn't go down very well, and the US basically set up plans to go in and invade Saudi Arabia and take all the oil for itself. So obviously they didn't go ahead with that plan because oil embargo was slowly lifted because of the threats of invasion as well. So they lifted that threat, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again. If the US gets very desperate, and we're talking very desperate here. We're talking about, if these gasoline prices start going on a ridiculous sky high amount and people in the US start rioting all over the place and the US has got no answers to how they can reduce the gas prices, I believe they will do something as stupid as going into Saudi Arabia and taking that oil. I wouldn't put it past them, to be honest. And this would only happen in extreme circumstances, by the way. The most likely scenario, if there was a war, um, would be in Iran and take Iran's oil rather than Saudi Arabian oil. That could be quite likely. Something maybe Israel instigates and US comes in as well to help. So that could happen as well. But the way the world's geopolitics is, you just don't know what's happening from one day to the next. I mean, right now, the US is busy with Ukraine, providing Ukraine help in its military, doing a proxy war. And you know that there's a lot of intelligence officers in Ukraine right now helping Ukraine fight the Russians, trying to kill as many Russians as possible. So they're focused on that. But the ultimate goal is obviously China. They look at Taiwan. They're obviously trying to pick fights with China regarding Taiwan as well. But whatever they do, they still can't seem to get away from the Middle East. Biden has tried to get away from the Middle East. They tried to get out of Afghanistan and Iraq and stuff, but they keep getting dragged into the Middle East. And I just think that maybe if things get really, really bad in the United States, I believe that could be an option for the United States to go into either Iran or Saudi Arabia and take that oil for themselves. Because, but for that to happen, things got to be extremely bad. I mean, the pumps, the oil and gas pumps probably go up by maybe 500% or 1000% or something like that. If it gets absolutely ridiculous and the US has got no options whatsoever, I believe they could do something like that. However, there's one major problem if that happens. The major problem is going to be Russia and China. I don't think China or Russia will allow that. And right now, China is in a very good position to protect other countries, and so is Russia. And I believe if something like that happens, China and Russia will do a joint military, um, will form a joint military team and to basically stop the US from taking over all of Saudi Arabia. Same way the Russia is helping Syria as well. I believe they will be helping Saudi Arabia as well because they will not sit there and allow the US to take over Saudi Arabia and dictate oil terms and steal all the oil. I don't think they will sit back and let that happen. So you have all of these options the US can take. I don't think any of them will work. Um, the only thing that the US can probably do is try and de-escalate things in Ukraine, uh, put the world back to normal again. Have some sort of peace talks with Russia, get rid of all of the sanctions, get some normality back, and maybe back then things can go back to normal. But I don't think that will happen either because the US and the neocons love to double down on things or triple down. So yeah, it's not looking good, unfortunately. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed my talk. Hope it was very enlightening. Let me know what you think and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you want to support me, please do on Locals or Patreon. YouTube has decided not to pay me. I'm thinking of opening up another channel. I'm going to decide over the next few days. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, keep it going, guys, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.